Welcome, everyone, to the Preschool Mindfulness Summit. Today, I'm very happy to introduce you to Dr. Genevieve Von Lob. She's coming to us from London today. Genevieve is a British clinical psychologist. She's worked with children, with parents, with teenagers, and she's the author of the book 5 Deep Breaths, which sounds very intriguing, and she's very kindly given us the first chapter of the book. So if you click on her speaker bio, all her website information, how to order the book will be there, but also the first chapter of the book, so you can get a taster for that. So she, like me, is on a mission to empower parents to trust themselves on this journey and to help bring out the best in themselves and the children that they're bringing up. So she's also a mom, so she's got that perspective as well. And just want to say thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Helen. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. So tell us a little bit about how you first found out about mindfulness, how you started your journey in this area.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, obviously I'm a clinical psychologist, but I'm going to just talk maybe a little bit about my personal background, because I think obviously so much of our own healing journey informs how we work professionally as well. And my own background was a little bit unconventional. I was born into a hippie commune to a single mom. I didn't know my dad, so it was very much just me and my mom. And then she had an amazing singing voice, and she got a scholarship to train to become an opera singer. So we moved to London. We were living in Norwich at the time, which is a city in the UK, a small city. And we had a very strange life of being in a very financially strapped single parent household, and then in this very glamorous world of opera and theatre and stage. So that was very much my early experiences as a child, and fairly chaotic actually, but interesting. And then when she'd finished her studies and she was just about to embark on her career, very tragically, she was killed in a car accident when I was 9 years old. So that's my big trauma that, I've had to work on all my life. But as we know, these experiences are what inform what we do in our lives and the missions that we go on. And I was very fortunate that my grandparents were her parents brought me up, and they were very loving. I had a very stable, very secure background, and I put a lot of my grief and sadness, I think, into performing arts, into singing and music and playing piano and acting. So I think I had that outlet. So fast forward to my 20s, when I was training to be a clinical psychologist, and that they encourage you very much when you're training to look at yourself, to look at your childhood wounds and your background. That's really when I began my healing journey. And then when I'd qualified as a clinical psychologist, I'd been in lots of talk therapy and talked and analysed myself to the hills. But I was starting to find that just talking about my issues wasn't really taking away what I was starting to recognise in myself, which was anxiety. I had anxiety and a lot of, I was very drained. I felt very fatigued. And I started to recognize that myself, that I needed to start to look inside my body, because I was very in my head. I was very very analytical, but not very embodied. And that's when I started to naturally draw and find mindfulness. And I started to just do very small little bits of mindfulness during the day, of just sitting with myself, sitting with my feelings. And that was so overwhelming. I remember those first times when I was doing it, just the amount of stuff that was in me, because I'd never really gone there.
Yeah.
I'd analysed it, but I'd never really looked inside my body before, and to actually observe that and the overwhelming nature of that. So I did little bits, and gradually over the years my practice has evolved, and it's become much more habitual to be able to observe myself, observe my mind, observe my physical sensations in my body, and to take these pauses in the day. And I guess just working with that with clients. So in my therapy work with young people, I've worked as a clinical psychologist, mainly focused with children, teenagers and parents. I've been very much on the front line of working in child and adolescent mental health services. So I've really seen firsthand a lot of the pressures that our young people are facing today, with the academic pressures, with social media, with the climate crisis, with so much that they have a very difficult time these days, and as well as parents who are also struggling and finding it very hard. It's a hard time to be a parent. And I think with my work, because I've been working with both children, teenagers and parents, I kept finding myself naturally drawn towards supporting the parent, because I very much was seeing the parent as holding the space and being the bedrock for the whole family. Yeah. And I thought if I could help the mums, particularly mums, to feel more centered, more connected, calmer, to be able to cope and manage themselves better and feel more connected to themselves, then they could really hold that space for their children and for their teenagers. So I've naturally gone much more towards the mission of really bringing mindfulness to parents, because the power of it is just extraordinary. I felt it myself. I felt the power of it myself, and I really want to share this with parents and to help them.
Yeah, I can see your passion coming through, and thank you for being so transparent. And I think a lot of people, myself included, and people that I interview, it all kind of starts with something in us, and then we see that power and want to share it with other people. And one other thing that you said that really stuck out for me is when you experienced trauma maybe years ago, and you kind of think you're dealing with it because you've been doing it with your head, and then suddenly, years later, things are not okay. And I think that's quite common as well. So thank you for sharing that. So let's talk about the work that you do with parents. So what are some of the main challenges that you think they're facing in today's world?
Well, I think, first of all, there's a bombardment of information now out there because of social media, online. There's so many books. In fact, even though I've written a book, I'm not really into parenting books because I think they can sometimes promote fear and anxiety. And I think because there's so much information out there, it can make parents feel like there's a right way to parent, that there is a sort of perfect way to parent, and that there's some magical strategies that if you just put these strategies into place, then you'll be doing it right. And so I think what all of this fear and anxiety does with all this information is it makes parents doubt themselves a lot. And what we were just saying about being very in the head, I think because we've got more into our heads as a culture, we start to try and analyze the way we're parenting rather than really trusting our intuition, which is in our bodies. So really, I want to help parents to trust themselves. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges is a lot of doubt and searching outside for the answers. Yeah. And then there's the obvious challenges that we all as humans and as parents face today, and that we're all quite stressed. We've got a lot on our schedules. I think parents are time poor. Often you've got two parents, if there's a two-parent family or one-parent family, out at work. So it's hard to always find that quality time to spend just being with your children because there's just so much to do. Yeah. And then as a parent, we have comparison. There's a lot more opportunities to compare ourselves, not just in the playground anymore, but online. and at some level we know that what we're seeing online is not real, that people are putting out these perfect images of themselves often, but it still doesn't stop the niggles, I think, for parents who may be really struggling. And I think that can make you feel more disconnected and isolated as a parent. And some of the other challenges are, comparison, competition come up in parenting as well, like feeling like you're not giving your child enough opportunities or enough things, and compared to other parents, or not giving them good enough food. And there's so many places as a parent to feel like you're failing, like, are there? You just feel like you're failing. You can feel like you're failing constantly, because there's just, and we put these expectations on ourselves as parents. So there's not only all of that, and I think also we're hugely self-critical as humans. We're hugely self-critical as parents before we become parents, and then this inner critic just takes over, because there's just so many opportunities for us to criticize ourselves. And then and not to mention, obviously, with our own children who are living an increasingly more stressful world. I've witnessed myself the amount of children and teenagers that have come to me with so much pressure of academic pressure and feeling like they have to reach this mark. And the assessment of children nowadays is just, it's more intense than it's ever been. And in the UK, we're starting to assess children at 4, even, and even just the word for me, assessment, even that we're measuring our children against some benchmark. What does that do to our children? Do they feel good enough? So anyway, so those are the challenges. And also we've got the new area of social media and technology. And this is another big challenge for parents that I see.
So a whole range there.
We know all the challenges facing parents today, but I think even though we might all be facing these challenges and struggling, it still doesn't stop parents feeling very isolated and very alone. And I think if there was one message I'd want to get out to parents, is you're not alone. You're really not alone, even though it feels like you're the only one going through it. There really are. I think every parent is struggling with something.
Right. Yeah. And it changes through the ages, doesn't it? But it doesn't really go away. There's as you said, there's the next thing and then the next thing. And I think you pointed out so many different things that the competition and the seeing all the perfection out there and testing, and it is all together. It builds up into a great big powerful frenzy, I guess, at times. So when we think about mindfulness, how would you define mindfulness, and then maybe how would mindfulness help us deal with some of those parenting challenges?
So for me, mindfulness is very much about our coming into the present moment. It's coming into this moment here and now. So letting go of the past, letting go of what might happen in the future, being fully here now. And with that presence, we can start to learn to observe our thoughts, our minds, and we can start to observe our feelings and our feelings in our bodies. And it's really about, when we can be that present, we really can start to learn to respond to situations rather than reacting on autopilot, or reacting in the way that, because of things that have happened in the past, would make us react now. We can react more spontaneously, really, to what's happening, what's coming at us. So that's really, in a nutshell, I see. And it sounds so simple, doesn't it? Mindfulness. Whenever we talk about it, but it is simple. But it can be so hard, because our minds are so
make up stories,
stories and take over the show.
Yeah, for sure. So tell us about some practical, simple ideas that maybe parents can use on a day-to-day basis to help us bring more mindfulness into our routines and into our days.
Yeah, so as you said earlier in my book, 5 deep breaths, because I wanted to put something about the breath in the title, because for me, the breath is the ultimate think, and we're doing it all the time anyway, we're breathing. But it's obviously the thing that if we can learn to take really deep conscious breaths, mindful breaths, then that is what really calms down the whole nervous system. It's really what helps to reduce stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. And it puts the brake, doesn't it, on the stress response. And I mean, and when I do it with parents, I just say, come on, breathe. And they find it, often find it's so challenging because so many people are breathing shallowly. They just think, well, that's ridiculous. I need to talk about my issues. Come on, get on with it. It's like, no. This is really where this is the real start of you becoming more, I think, embodied as well. So that's always what I start parents with, 5 or 10 or 15 conscious breaths. And I get them to practice that at some points, and maybe using a cue point in the day, such as when they're putting on the kettle, or sitting in the car waiting for the children to come out, or when you're sitting with your child reading to them, just to remember, just take a breath. Really feels so good, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does.
Sometimes when I'm running around frantically with my toddler, she's 2, and you can think I've forgotten to breathe. She's just so busy at the moment, and then it's just that taking that deep breath and saying to myself, just let go or release. It just helps so much. So that is definitely a tip, and that's something that you can incorporate into your life, because I think when I talk about mindfulness with parents, it can scare many of them off because they think that they have to do a meditation practice and sit, and they're like, that's impossible. I'm never going to be able to sit even for 10 minutes a day with my eyes closed. There's just too much to do, and I just couldn't do it. So this is a simple way to just start coming more into the moment.
Yeah, I think as you said, it's a lot of people do get, you start thinking, I have to read a book and find all this time and make a space and have a cushion. And, but so I love the simple ideas with the breath, because it's always with us. And I personally love that as well. And I love what you said about creating a cue. So when you put the kettle on, or for me, it's when I walk through a door. And I think it's so important, because a lot of people say, oh, I meant to do it, and then I totally forgot. And so creating those kind of cues, I think, is really important as well, just to at the beginning build that habit in. So so a second thing I would say, because I think one of the dominant things that parents bring to me is their chattering minds. I mean, busy, over analytical minds. So I think another thing that we have to become more aware of is what stories our minds are telling us. And I call them, kind of scripts or movie scripts in my book. Because it's common ones for parents are the guilt script. I'm a terrible parent. I failed again. Or I shouted at my kids again this morning. I can't keep it together. All these thoughts that go through our minds. And the other ones are worry about our children, worrying that we're not doing enough, and worrying about the future for them, and worry. We can get a little bit of worry's okay, and a little bit of guilt's okay. It's when it gets out of control, isn't it? And so I very much encourage parents to become aware, start to really tune into what's going on in your mind. So take some moments when you're very stressed, just observe, just see if you can observe the stories, and see if you can say to yourself, okay, I see that story. Thank you, mind. And that's another guilt story. And they start to recognize these stories are running because of programs from the past. It's because of experiences and our childhoods and our culture. We've developed those stories from things that happened to us before, and we're still replaying them in the present moment. And so I think awareness is key to those stories. Yeah, so true. Where I think with the negativity bias, we can,
Absolutely.
and sometimes, not even being aware that what you're saying to yourself until you
Absolutely.
start to listen and then think, oh, that's not very nice, is it?
Nice.
And is that really true? So I think that's so important, that awareness. So tell us another maybe idea or tip that parents can use to help them in their daily lives, to manage some of these kind of ups and downs of parenting.
Yeah, so I think moving on from the scripts, and I think we talked about it before, is the kindness, the self-compassion. For me, that's almost the biggest part of mindfulness, is compassion. And I think I've heard many mindfulness teachers talk about it as kindfulness. And I think that is a great word for it, the kindfulness. And there's so much research now, isn't there, of the benefits of kindness towards ourselves in terms of our stress levels and feeling more happy and just our overall well-being. And it's amazing because most of us have got such a strong inner critic. And that will come from the way we've been raised and the culture we've been raised, and not feeling ever good enough, as we talked about earlier, what we're measuring ourselves against some benchmarks. And just because as well, our parents and their parents, as all the previous generations, none of them were learnt skills of kindness. So how were they ever able to teach us to be kind to ourselves? And we know that we often internalize the dialogue of our parents. The way that our parents speak, often that becomes part of our inner voice, not just our parents. There are many other influences. So I think this is one of the biggest areas. And so I really encourage parents to, first of all, treat themselves with kindness. So there's the action part of it. So what can you do to give yourself permission to prioritize yourself in the day? Because so many parents I work with have so much guilt about even giving themselves half an hour to do something for themselves. That's really tough for a lot of parents. Even just to give themselves an hour to go and have a walk in nature, just for themselves. They can put the chores off. They can just have that hour for themselves. It's really important though, and I think it's a priority. So there's what you do for yourself, and I think trying to have the intention to carve out some time in the week, even if you don't manage it, just even the intention to put it in the schedule. Try and put that hour in for you, and even doing something for yourself at home that's really nurturing, like having a nice hot bath or going to bed a bit earlier and listening to that podcast or reading that book that you've been wanting to read for ages, but you always put it off because you've got so many other things to do. So I think prioritizing ourselves is vital. And then also the way we speak to ourselves, as you mentioned. And that takes time because the other voice is so powerful, it can take over. And so it may feel a bit fake at first, but actually just beginning to learn to maybe come up with some phrases for ourselves, like I'm being kind to myself right now. I can be good to myself in this moment. I give myself permission to do something good for myself. So whatever it is. I love that. And I think, like what you said, right? It's about building it into a habit, isn't it? So that our default isn't that negative voice, but that we can change that. And I know what you mean about so many people feel guilty taking the time to do something, and yet the research is showing how beneficial that is. So hopefully everyone watching will take that, and I'm sure you talk more about that in your book. Do you want to just give a little overview? I know you've given us the first chapter, which was really kind and generous of you, but just walk us through what parents can expect to find in the book. Sure. So I very much, the first half of the book is very much focused on you as the parent. So because ultimately I do believe that parenting is about relationship and connection with our children. That's what it's about. But that connection has to start with ourselves first. before we can really truly connect with our kids at that heart-centered level. So I always with my work with parents and in the book is that the focus is on you and doing a little bit of work on yourself. So there's some work on the scripts we were talking about, becoming more aware of what I call the frenemy mind. How to it's not a bad thing. We have to make friends with this mind at some level. So I give some tips in there, and then I talk you through the breath and doing some simple breathing. There's also some information about connecting with what I call the inner parent. So what I mean by that is connecting with who we really are as parents, not what we think we are from our own parents, the background, the template that we might have inherited or from society or culture, but what we really believe and how we really want to live our lives. So I talk very much about values in there and identifying your parenting values. And then there's a chapter as well about getting out of our heads into our bodies,
right?
Which is key. So that's side of the first part, and then the second part is more then in relationship with your child and recognizing that our children can really push our buttons at times. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
And in a way, I really see those button pushers as opportunities for us as parents to really look at that and see what it tells us about parts of us that are perhaps not integrated or not so healed, and that they can be opportunities for our own growth. So, you know, every situation where our child pushes our buttons is that opportunity. So I really like to frame it in that way. And so I look at and actually taking some of Dr. Daniel Siegel's great work as well. So I talk about the neuroscience of the brain, child's brain, and using his amazing and in that his amazing book, The Whole Brain Child, with Tina Payne Bryson on the downstairs and the upstairs brain. And I really find that really helps parents to understand what's going on for their children neurologically, and then they can take the blame take the blame away from them. And this is our children are developing. This is the way they're developing their brains. And then I talk very much about having a toolbox really to help you. And some of those are very much based on mindfulness toolbox. Right. So, and I think I used one of referenced, of course, Christopher Willard's idea of the glitter jar for children, which I absolutely loved. I had to include that in the book.
Yeah, they're amazing. Well, thank you. It sounds wonderful. And as I mentioned, you can get the first chapter and find out about Dr. Von Lob's website and how to contact her and more about her book. But I just want to say thank you so much for coming on and sharing all that great information with us today. We really appreciate it and look forward to keeping in touch.
Thank you so much. And thank you for all your work too, Helen.
Thanks.